Hello friends, we are here today in Colossians chapter 2. Now it's interesting to me that when I guess it's not interesting to me, it may be interesting to you, but probably not. When I was young, and actually I was doing this for a while, it was probably over 15 years, I was the leader of a youth group called Impact. But what I would do in that Impact group is, I was a leader of a group called CL2. And CL2 stood for Colossians chapter 2. So the reason we named it after Colossians chapter 2 is because it's just such a great passage talking about how God, well, basically how we need to get back to Jesus and how we don't want to be conformed to, you know, the philosophies and the thought, you know, the zeitgeist, if you will, of our culture. We need to come back to Jesus. And so this chapter, he does talk about how there were people that were coming in after Paul, and they were saying things contrary to the gospel. You know, we're led to believe that their understanding of Jesus was not, well, that Jesus wasn't like supreme within the framework of their salvation, you know, in the way that they should be living. But they mix it with all these other things that they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. You know, we're led to believe that it's a lot of like, don't touch this, don't do that. You know, a lot of rule following. And a hint of Judaizing, you know, observing different rules and different dates and things like that. You know, different holidays. So, within that, Paul addresses that and says, you don't need to do that. You need to come back to Christ, because in Christ, and he gives these three word pictures. You know, he says, don't let anybody disqualify you. Don't let anybody say that you need to add anything to the gospel, because you don't. And so he starts off and he talks about circumcision. And he says, you've been circumcised with the circumcision of Christ. And of course, it's not a literal circumcision. He's just saying, you know, in circumcision, it's kind of a symbol of you getting rid of the flesh, you know, the sinful part, the wrong part, and you need to get rid of that. And what's left is new life. So he's saying, you know, when we accepted Christ, he took that away from us. That's the circumcision of Christ. We don't need to do it. He did it for us. And then he talks about baptism. You know, in baptism, he was like, and you were dead. In the same way that when you're baptized, it's a symbol of like dying, and then, you know, whoever's baptizing you is bringing you back up. It's because that's a symbol of Jesus bringing us back up to life. That's why, you know, you can't baptize yourself. Someone needs to do it for you. But it's a symbol of how it's by no means something that we do, and it's not something that you have to try to do. You know, there's this idea, I think it's still true today, that you need to try harder in order to be loved by God, or to do the right thing. You know, it's this idea that in some way there's good and bad based on how hard you're trying. And he's saying, no, it's kind of like you're in or you're out. You know, you're either part of the family or you're not part of the family. It has nothing to do with how hard you're trying or what you're doing and what you're staying away from. You know, it has to do with you and your relationship with Christ. And he uses this last word picture, and I think it's interesting to me. This is the one that's most interesting. And it's this idea of debt. You know, there's this, when you were in debt, back then, a lot of times it meant that you would go into slavery. But, you know, it often means that they would give you a certificate of your debt. You know, it'd be this kind of like a burden that that would follow you, and a lot of times there would be no way to pay this debt. But what he's saying is that they would take, the word picture he's using is they take this form of your debt, this certificate of your debt, and they would put it up and they would nail it on the cross. He's kind of mixing his metaphors a little bit, because on the cross, they would take your punishment, the reason that you're being crucified, and they would nail it to the cross so everybody would know why they're being crucified. And it was usually like, because they were an enemy of the state or something like that. Very serious crimes. But he's saying, whoever you are, you can just take all the debts. And by that he means everything that you've done wrong. All the things that you've gone toward that you shouldn't have. Anything that you've done wrong, anything you feel guilty about, you can just take that and nail it to the cross right up above where it gave his conviction. And it's interesting, with Jesus, his conviction, when it just said King of the Jews. But we can give that to him, all of our debts. So he's giving these word pictures and saying you need to just come back to Christ. You need to come back to Jesus and trust in him for everything. And don't be, and he names all these different references of all these ways that people are going against the gospel. And I think it's so true of our culture today. In so many ways, our culture is getting away from God, and it's diluting the gospel and mixing it with the things of this world. So that's Colossians chapter 2. It's a great chapter, and it really speaks to our culture today, and especially the youth. And so I think it was a good name for the youth group. I didn't name it, but it's definitely fitting. Anyways, that's Colossians chapter 2. Have a great day. Bye.